Council meet to order. At this time, I'd like to call on Miss Mary Lynn Kennelly for our invocation.
Thank you, sir. Would you let's pray, please? Our dear Heavenly Father, we come to you again tonight. We ask that you be with us, that you guide and direct our steps and our thoughts and our actions. I ask that you bless every family that is represented in this room tonight, and I ask that you bless the people of Fairfield County. We thank you for the men and women who are fighting for our freedom on foreign shores. Please lift them up, keep them out of harm's way as much as possible. And dear Lord, again, we thank you for our many, many blessings. Some we see and some we do not. All these things I ask in your precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Ms. Kelly. At this time, I'm going to call on Mr. Pope for our description and format, and then for him to proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good evening, Council and citizens of Fairfield. The first item is just a housekeeping item. The Fire Marshal, evidently we're not used to having capacities like this. So I think we have a capacity of 80 in this particular room, and we do have an overflow right down the hallway. So we ask that if anyone comes in late or if you need to stand, to use the overflow down the hallway. Mr. Chairman and Council, just to reiterate or go over the format again, what we will do is we will have a presentation tonight solely on the local option sales tax. We've already asked citizens to go ahead and sign the sign-up sheet if they have questions to ask regarding the presentation. If there are any other questions outside of the local option sales tax, we have contact information that you can contact myself or Ms. Brown, the clerk of council, regarding that information to be discussed at a future event. We will go through the presentation, then there will be a question and answer period for the council. Then immediately after that, we will have a question and answer period where we will entertain those questions of the citizens who have signed up on the sign-up sheet, and those answers will be given while everyone is still here in the audience. So that'll be our format. And so, Mr. Chairman, without any further ado, I'd like to call up Mr. Michael Kozlari, who is assisting the county with this, and he'll introduce, I guess, one of our main speakers or presenters for this evening.
Apparently I need to lose weight. Mr. Chairman, members of council, I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening. Obviously, members of the public, there are a few of you here, so we hope that we can address council's questions and your questions at the stage that we are right now. When the council suggested that we do a presentation about the local option sales tax, I asked internally if Ray Stevens, who's one of my partners at Parker Poe, would take a look at this as well. For those of you who have not met Ray before, Ray is a former director of the Department of Revenue here in South Carolina, was a former administrative law court judge. Obviously, the administrative law court in South Carolina deals with tax issues. And before that was the Deputy Chief Attorney General in charge of the tax division of the Attorney General's office. So Ray comes with a little bit of experience when it comes to tax issues. So I'm going to let Ray actually do the bulk of the presentation, and then the two of us will be happy to answer any questions that the council has. And then, of course, during the citizens period, we'll be happy to answer those questions as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, member of council. As Michael has said, I'm here to sort of give you my view of what's been done in Fairfield County. And you will see we're going to do a pretty straightforward presentation, introduction and background. Most of that you will already be very familiar with, but a lot of this is for members of our audience to be sure we're kind of all on the same page. Secondly, we're going to talk about the Fairfield County method by which the local option sales tax was applied. And we'll see that there are two methods being used. One's a budget method and the other one's a tax bill method. And then we're going to kind of conclude with some conclusions and recommendations, at which point we're more than happy to take questions from any member of the council. And then as council is finished, any member of the audience who's with us today. So that's kind of what our format is. The first one is just a general way of introduction. And then again, this is pretty straightforward to all of y'all who have been here at council. You've got a duty to submit a budget to council, and that's a duty that arises from the administrator. That particular duty is one not taken lightly at all. It's designed to be sure that the county is doing as much planning as it can to figure out how much it's going to need to operate for the year. And of course, what you have on the screen is the statute that requires that the county administrator propose to you the budget. And then we come to this. What does the budget cover? Time period. Clearly, it's a fiscal year. Every year is going to stand on its own. Things change from year to year, so obviously every year you'll take a new look at what's going on. And you're doing it for the fiscal year, and that's the July 1st through the end of June 30th of the next year. And when does the budget have to be approved? Again, nothing new to you folks who've been doing this. And this is what's the challenging part of doing budgets. You have to do the budget prior to your year beginning. You're making estimates of what you think things are going to be like for you. So County Council has to adopt annually and prior to the beginning of the fiscal year the budget for the county. This is an extremely simple diagram showing simply the big pictures of a budget. Clearly, Fairfield County has to come up with a budget, and that budget is really made up of two very major sections. One of them is, what am I going to spend? That's the expenditures. And the expenditures, of course, are used for providing services to the citizens. The other side of your budget, since I now know what I've got to spend, I've got to figure out how I'm going to cover my expenditures. And for purposes of us just looking at the local option sales tax tonight, we're simply going to assume that we only have two sources of revenue. All we get is money from our property taxes, and then we get money from our local option sales tax. Fairfield, of course, is a county that is participating in the local option sales tax, the 1 penny. This is a copy of what Fairfield did. And this ordinance is interesting because, as you'll see, it says 100% of the revenues generated from the local option sales tax are going to be used for property tax credits. So pretty straightforward, pretty clear. Whatever comes in, Fairfield is going to use it for property tax credits. And then in 2006, actually began collecting the local option sales tax. So now we're going to look at what's the method that Fairfield County has been applying for application of this. First of all, the council began setting the millage by accounting for the lost credit. This is what I'm going to show you as to how we do it. You'll see here, this is a typical ordinance that Fairfield uses. We've simply blocked out the dates and numbers so as to not be distracted. This is the standard ordinance that Fairfield uses. And you'll see on our chart, this is the first page of it. And what we're doing here is we're figuring out how much am I going to spend out of my general fund. The total that we're going to spend for purposes of our example is the 100. No magic about this. Every year, lots of work goes into you trying to figure out what are we going to need to make our budget work. But for our purposes, we're simply going to say you needed $100 to make it happen. So then you figured out, well, where am I going to get my $100 from? In your general fund, in our example, we're only going to get our money from two sources. One of them is property taxes. And for our purposes, we're going to say, be sure they're right, $90 we're going to get. Well, we know we need 100. So in order to get our other 10, we have taken a look at the data available to us, and we've said, well, we got this local option sales tax. We think we're going to get $10 out of that. So we now have our total $100. Here's what we did in establishing the resolution to set the millage. As you know, the millage is how am I going to get my property taxes from the citizens in the county. And this is very, very interesting. What the Fairfield County does is on the general fund, it says I need $100, and I can get that $100 by imposing 10 mills. But the ordinances that we have show that there is a sales tax credit that's automatically backed out of the millage that's being imposed. So rather than imposing 10 mills on the citizens to raise the property tax, What Fairfield County has done is only imposed the 9 mills. And it knows it's getting $10 from local option sales tax. So the amount that the citizens have to pay in property tax is simply the $90. So in essence, Fairfield County is giving the local option sales tax on the front end when it sets its millage. So the amount the citizens are paying is only the 90. And this is what goes to the taxpayer typically in October, November. And you'll see the highlighted area, and this is just one that we pulled at random, but they're all of the same way. You'll see that there's a sales tax credit given on everybody's bill. So what is happening in Fairfield County is not only is Fairfield County giving the sales tax credit on the millage side, but they're also giving the sales tax credit when the bill goes out. So conclusions and recommendations. The county is granting the loss credit in 2 steps. It's doing it at the beginning when you set your budget, and it's doing it again, in my view, sort of at the end when the bill goes out. So the amount is actually being granted to the citizens in 2 different places. So what's the impact on the method of this lost revenues being received? The lost revenues are applied to the property tax relief. Based on all that I have seen, there is no question that the lost revenues are in fact being applied to property tax relief. They're not being used for something else. Rather, they're always going to the property tax relief. To the extent that there is ever any excess left over in that amount of monies being received from lost revenues, those are to be applied and carried forward to the next year. They're not simply, well, these are extra monies and we can do what we want with them. There are always excess amounts that if they are there, they're carried forward to the next year and are applied again to property tax relief. And they're applied the first things out of the gate. So the amount that is not spent for the prior year, that's the first amount that's going to be used for property tax relief the next year. We've got just 3 short recommendations. The ability to estimate what I'm going to get in terms of my lost revenue every year, that's always a challenge. We are suggesting just sort of a continued refinement in the way that that estimate is derived. There's data that's available, the county has already been using, but to the extent that further analysis can be had, that's probably a matter that the county might want to continue to make refinements on. Ensure, as the county is doing, just continue to ensure that if there's any excess collections at the end, that is carried over and is given for credits in the following year. That is what is being done. We just need to be sure that it continues to be done. The last one is grant the sales tax credit only at the tax bill stage. The reason for doing that is, quite frankly, it makes it much simpler for the county to be sure that the credit is in fact applied. It is also an item that is quite readily apparent on the tax bill. When you look at the tax bill, you can certainly see that you've gotten the full advantage of a tax credit. So, by and large, our review, at least from the procedural stage, shows that Fairfield County has well recognized that it has the ability to provide local option sales tax only to property tax relief. And it appears that the county is doing it in 2 steps. One, when it sets the millage, and secondly, when it actually imposes the bill, you will see that your bill will have a credit on there. So from our point of view, that's what's happening. Michael and I are happy to answer any questions that any of you might have about the process.
Council?
I have a question.
Council will answer first, and then we'll open it up to the audience. Yeah. We'll go with the folks that signed up, okay? Council, any questions for Ray? Ray, one of the things that First of all, thank you and Michael for coming tonight. One of the things that the council was concerned about was the fact that the amount that was not you talking about anticipating what your millage is going to be and what you need to operate. The fact of it is, that was one of the concerns of council, that we were giving that money back on the tail end, and that was one of the things that was really concerned to me, and I think all the council members. But you said we had been adhering to that.
Yeah, based on, and again, this was not a detailed examination, but given the time that we had to take a look at it, the documents that we see show that they're given twice, one by way of an estimate on the front side, and then secondly again when the bill goes out. So the amounts, council clearly has knowledge of the fact that all of it has to be used for property tax credits. All of it is being used for property tax credits. To the extent that there is still a balance not yet expended, that item simply comes forward to the next year and forms a part of the new amounts that you're going to be receiving. And again, it will still form a part of the credits for the succeeding year.
Anything else from council? Ms. Robinson?
Well, the fact that we still have not expended all of those funds, how do you propose us to correct that?
Well, and Michael may be able to address this better than I, but I think the idea of putting all of the credit on the taxability when you send out the bill, on the front side, you're trying to estimate how much am I going to get through the year. So you're doing that by setting your budget in July. As you know, your property tax bills are going to go out in October, November, and the funds are going to have to be allocated to give that total tax credit. As the funds continue to come in during the year, you will again, if you have an amount not expended at the end, that becomes a part of the way you estimate how much am I going to get for the next year. And if you continue to have an excess at the end of the year, that suggests that maybe the estimation for each year needs to be, as we say, continued to re-examine. The problem, as you know, with estimating is if I give too much, I can't get it back. And the Department of Revenue and other folks will encourage you to be conservative because counties have difficulties. I mean, they simply cannot get it back once they've expended it. So if you continuously have an excess, perhaps further analysis of how much am I going to make my estimate for would be a thing to look at.
But what I'm asking now is, we know we have an excess. More than likely we have an excess. How do we correct it this year?
At this point, I can't say that. Working with the auditors, the county's external auditors, we don't have numbers through the end of fiscal year 13 yet. And the reason for that is not any county doing. The checks always come a month and a half or so after the end of the month for which they're due. So for example, June's checks, as I think Mr. Pope said at the beginning of the meeting before the council was in here, we hope to have the numbers from the state treasurer's office probably by the middle of August. At that point, we should be able to come back to council with the auditors who will have looked at the numbers internally. The lawyers, unfortunately, I can do math, but that's about it. Once we have the auditors to look at that, we will be able to come back with a number for council to say whether there is a fund balance, and if so, how much that fund balance actually is. The procedural answer, however, is very simple. The statute speaks to this. If there is a carryover, that is, if we have revenue left over at the end of 13 that was not part of the credit given in any prior year, then that money has to be given as the beginning of the credit in fiscal year 14, which I believe Ray already said, but I just want to make that clear. So if there's money left over, that money has to be given as part of the credit in fiscal year 14.
Mike?
Yes, sir.
And that credit has to be given to the penny, correct?
To the penny?
Yes.
Yes.
Any other questions from council? Hearing none, Ms. Brown, if you will start calling the roll.
That way the podium.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
what we try to have is not where we don't have too many folks around the podium there, but if the citizens who Ms. Brown calls up, and we'll answer the questions from right here, where the rest of the audience can hear the answer to the questions that the citizens have. That's okay.
Mr. Richard Johnson.
I'm gonna talk on Wednesday.
Miss Elizabeth Jenkins.
Is this audit going to be done back to the beginning, from 2006 to present, not just through 2013? Okay. Should this not have been reconciled yearly? From an accounting point of view, I would think that this would have been done yearly, reconciled, any monies carried over. It just appears that nobody's really sure what's going on here, and that doing a budget, you can't just make numbers up, so.
I can kind of speak to some of that. From an audit perspective, I can't tell you what the audit standard is. Obviously, I'm not an auditor, so the auditor may be able to answer that. However, the audit does reflect annually what the fund balance is. So if there needs to be some restatement of the fund balance, that's something that the auditors will ultimately have to determine once we have final numbers from fiscal year 13. And again, that's fiscal year 13 back through fiscal year 06, which is when the collection started.
Okay. Should there or should there not be a separate escrow account for these monies collected so that it doesn't get mixed up with the general fund and used for something else?
The simple answer to that question is there is nothing in the statute that requires a separate account. The second answer is, and again, this is an auditor answer, so I'm going to hesitate to answer because I'm the lawyer, not the auditor. The way I believe they account for this is funds that are not credited in the current year. That is, given Ray's example, if the county expected $10 to come in and the county received 15, that $5 should be set aside under GASB 54, which is, they have names for those sort of set-asides, and I cannot remember if it's considered restricted or reserved. Oh, the people down there can't hear me. Sorry. So now you're going to have to hear me really loud. Under GASB 54, there are certain designations of fund balance, and I cannot remember, not being an auditor, but those funds should be carried, I believe, as either restricted or reserved to be used as a credit the following year. The amount that the county estimated to collect, that is the $10 in this example, is part of the county's general fund. It is actually part of the county's general fund. And the reason for that is, if you remember Ray's example, in a county that doesn't have a local option sales tax, if the county needs $100 to operate, the county can only expect to get $100 from property tax. All that's happening here is a replacement of the available funds from two sources. That is, 90s coming from property tax from the citizens and 10s coming from local option sales tax. Once the credit is authorized for that fiscal year, you essentially have said to the citizens, the county has said, pay us 90. In our example, of course, what ends up happening is you're really paying 80. But pay us 90 because the state's going to give us the other 10. So that becomes what the county uses to fund its general operations, is that $100. If the county collects an additional 5, that 5 has to be used the following year as the basis of the credit.
But you're saying this money is not restricted in any way. It is just still in the general fund, and if they do a oopsie, that money's gone?
What do you mean by oopsie? That one I can't answer.
Overspend?
Well, that's what the budget is for.
I'm sorry.
No, but the answer to the question is that's true regardless of where the funds come from. That is, if 100% were coming from property tax and the county overspent, the county still overspent. If 90% is coming from property tax and 10% is coming from local option sales tax, it's still 100%. And if the county overspent, the county overspent. I mean, that's a I hate to say it, but that's a different issue.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Happy. I do hate using the mic though. I feel like I'm about to give a witness at church.
Mr. Kevin Thomas.
I tend not to record myself. Mr. Pope, you mentioned earlier about the meeting space, and you mentioned that we tried to get another room reserved. Well, the room that was reserved, and you're following orders, this really isn't a tip to you. The room was already reserved by Representative Douglas and Senator Coleman for this, for tonight anyway. So you could have very easily moved the meeting over there. We sent an email on last Monday night requesting the email or the meeting be moved. Regarding not being able to be recorded, Gary Brown said he could record it. I could have brought a projector and a screen. The county, with all the money that we have, if we can't provide a screen and a projector anywhere in this county, I don't buy that at all. I think that's hogwash.
We are dealing with,
Sir, you're dealing with my
One
time.
second.
I'd ask you to let me finish my time if I could, please.
the agenda says the purpose of tonight's meeting is to solely discuss matters relating to the local 1-cent sales tax.
Absolutely. This meeting is about the 1-cent sales tax, and we could have had it where everybody could have seen it, sir. That's my point.
Well, stick to the,
I am sticking to the point, actually.
Stick to it, yeah.
I am sticking to the point. The point is where the meeting could be had. Just wanted to get that point across. We could have done it, but you chose not to.
stick to the agenda.
I'm telling you again, sir, I did stick to the agenda. Thank you very much.
Mr. Randy Bright.
Let me just go from here, if that's okay. Right, I have several questions.
Yes, sir.
The first one is, oh, yeah, okay. I need the mic.
Can we restart the time since he's having to move so they can hear?
Well, I think I can get under the 3 minutes, but anyway, my first question is, as it was shown and as it was explained, the local option sales tax is designed to reduce the millage rate. Is that correct?
It's designed to reduce property tax.
For property tax, right.
Correct.
Then why is it included in the general fund? Why is it included in the, have anything to do with the budget? If it's not pertaining to the budget, if it's not to support the budget, then why is it mentioned in the same context of the budget?
And I think I understand your question. It is part of the budget because the budget consists of both the revenues and expenditures that the county expects during the upcoming fiscal year. Before the local option sales tax, if we were to go back to fiscal year 2005, the budget would not have included anything other than property tax. And again, we're oversimplifying. Of course, there are other revenues that come in, but the bulk of the revenues that fund the general fund come from property tax, ad valorem taxes on real property and personal property, mostly motor vehicles. So that's your one of the revenues that come in. Well, you've got expenditures of $100. If you expect revenues of $100 from property tax, that's your budget for the year. What happened is when the county adopted the local option sales tax, the county still needs $100 to operate. Again, whether you think that $100 should be $95 is a separate policy question.
Okay.
But the county says we need $100 to operate. What's happening now is instead of expecting 100 from property tax, the county's expecting 90 from property tax and 10 from the local option sales tax.
Okay.
But it's still $100 that the county needs in revenue to operate.
That I understand. I still don't like the mixing of the funds. Specifically, the statute says it's to reduce the property tax, and it's just a mixing of the funds. And all it does is it clouds a picture of what the real budget is. If it's supposed to reduce your taxes, it can't be included in what you're supposed to be spending. Also, my next question, I see I'm about to run out of time. Does anybody have any idea, any ballpark figure of how much we are in arrears that are owed to the property owners?
Sure. What I can say is the number that I know that was, I can't remember which council meeting, there have been a few in the last couple of weeks, was about $5.2 million. That estimate did not include the credit off of the millage. That was only based on the estimate that was included on the tax bills.
Okay, so how much
So
Do the
I-
property owner, how much, does anybody have any idea how much the property owners are
As I
entitled
said,
to?
I'm hesitant to even guess, simply because the numbers for fiscal year 13 are not done. Once the numbers come in, the auditor will be back with us. I assure you, as Milton said before, we will put the spreadsheet up on the board and go through the numbers.
And I guess my last comment is, everyone realize this goes back 7 years. Does the council realize that Mr. Heinley was fired from Gaston County for mismanagement? But we hired him. And we allowed him to do the same thing to us. Up to $5 million we're owed in this room. Incredible. Thank you.
Mr. William Coleman.
Thank you. I won't take up but just a little bit of my 3 minutes, and I find it kind of odd that the answers to the question take part of the speaker's time, and I'm not sure that's quite right. I wouldn't have done it that way myself, but in all this stuff you've told us, have y'all audited Fairfield County's books to see if this was actually done?
I'm not sure what you mean by auditor.
Well, have you?
And again, I'm not being difficult. I'm not an auditor. If you mean, have I looked at property tax bills to see whether a credit appeared? Yes. Have I looked at every of the 24,000 and change for the last 8 years? No.
So,
Mr. Chairman.
I guess my question is, do we know that all the money was actually given, other than what was held back, what we didn't know we was going to get? Has it been credited to the taxpayers, and you have documentation, or it's in the budget, or it's in the books somewhere?
Mr. Coleman, I want to go back to your first question about have the books been audited. This county has had an independent and outside auditors to come in each and every year, and of course they're in the process this year of coming in auditing the books. The issue that we have here really is it is an accounting one based upon the estimate and the calculation, the accuracy of the calculation. And I guess what we're trying to get to is, I guess, really in a nutshell, is that amount of money that could be an over or an underestimate based upon that carryover amount. That is the amount that would be, whatever's there, that's what would be credited. And that's why I mentioned to Michael when he's mentioned that point of a credit to the penny. Could there have been a larger credit in the past? I guess that's certainly possible. But clearly now, with the accounting of the numbers, of course, that credit will be on this October's bill as to once we get the final numbers and can come to that number. So yes, there have been independent audits. The auditors can only audit based upon the estimates that are in the books, what they receive to audit. So it's not a matter of, from at least what we've detected, of mismanagement or anything like that, but it has to deal with actually the estimate itself.
Okay, well, why didn't the auditors catch this goings on when they was auditing?
Well, one of the things that the auditors don't do is the auditor does not estimate for you.
I understand that, but if they, and I would think they know enough about law, I know they're not lawyers, but I think they would know enough about procedure for what was to be done with this 1 cent sales tax that looks like along the way they would have recommended the same thing what y'all recommended, is that this be all of a tax credit.
Yes,
rather
sir.
in
Yep.
lieu of lowering the millage.
Yes, sir, but keep in mind, the credit has been given since the implementation of the local option sales tax credit. And as a matter of fact, the credit has been given twice a year. So yes, the credit has been given, so therefore I'll go back to the same point that I made, is actually it's the estimate itself which actually is the part of the challenge, what we're figuring out in the accuracy of that, to be able to make sure that we can account, and we're not trying to avoid or obfuscate on the numbers here is, but literally, I mean, the numbers are still out. But once we have those and share that with council, I mean, there's going to be a total accounting to know exactly what that credit should be, and of course that would be made up before those tax bills go out.
Well, it's mighty interesting that all this is happening in 2013 and we haven't heard any of this before this year.
Mr. Jonathan Good.
Thank you. And I understand in a forum like this the importance of choosing your words. And so I put a lot of importance on listening to the words used. And maybe I missed it because I was trying to take notes, but every time Mr. Stevens mentioned what the county's been doing, this two different method, he mentions that it appears that the county was giving it back on the front end and the back end. Do you have any, I mean, is there anything you can tell us that says that that was council's intent, or was that just an oversight or a miscue by someone in the auditor's office?
Sure, I can't tell you what council's intent was, other than what the ordinance from 2005 says. And the ordinance very clearly says that the council intends to give 100% of the money back as a credit on the property tax bill. So as far as what the council's intent was, their ordinance is the best evidence we have of what they intended.
So, and I guess my next question would be, if you're making this estimate and you're trying to get as close as you can, you know, estimating a little conservatively as to what the revenue is going to be, if you use that estimate, and that's the estimate that's being credited, but it's being credited twice, wouldn't that mean that the county spent or gave back twice as much as they should have?
It is possible that in years, and again, without the numbers, it is possible that in years that the county may have over-credited the citizens local option sales tax money, thereby reducing the bill, if I can answer please, thereby reducing the bill more than the local option sales tax would have generated, even with a conservative estimate, and therefore the county would have actually had to reach into its general fund balance and made up the difference.
Has that ever happened?
Ever happened?
Since this has been going on, since the...
Until we have the final numbers from the auditor.
But it would seem that if you were estimating, and this is kind of complicated, but if you're estimating an amount to give back in property tax credit, and you want that to be as close to the amount of revenue you're going to earn from this tax credit, or this tax, that if you gave that amount twice, it seems like you would be wildly overpaying every single year.
It depends on the nature of the estimate.
Unless you were estimating so conservatively that you could pay back twice what you intended because of a mistake and still end up owing money. Or tax credit.
Right, the tax credit, of course. The issue is whether the estimate is close enough. I think that's what the question ultimately relies on, is what the central theme of the question is, was the county estimating correctly?
Well, if in estimating this, would it help to look to the, I mean, my reading of the statute says, and that's in 41070, that no county may receive less from the distribution that it received in the previous year.
Right. The problem with that, of course, is the statute also requires, not this statute, but there are other revenue sources that come from the state. For example, the Aid to Local Government Fund, that also has a formula that the General Assembly changes every year to decide in that year what the estimate should be and what the ultimate amount should go to the local government. School districts face the same issue. So in terms of saying the estimate, according to the statute, shouldn't be any lower, is really meaningless because the General Assembly can always change the statute for what the actual number is. Now, having said that, the best way to estimate is, of course, the most recent fiscal year, assuming you're in a rising economy. That is, as long as local option sales tax collections are going up and you use the prior year as your estimate, then you're fine. The problem is nobody knows from year to year, particularly when this started in 2006, whether your estimate will end up being too high because you're going to be in a falling economy that year, in which case you could end up, and again, I'm not going to use numbers, but you could end up substantially overestimating the amount of money you anticipate collecting, and therefore, once again, having to go into the general fund balance to pay for it.
Since the time that we've had this in Fairfield County, has revenue generated from the local option sales tax ever been less than it was the previous year?
Not that I'm aware of.
Why wasn't it correct? They said it was correct.
Senator Creighton Coleman.
Thank you, and this question is for Mr. Stevens. I appreciate you coming here, and
Be here, sir.
And Isn't it, you stated in your presentation that it's not law that this money has to be segregated in a standalone account.
That's a correct statement. It does not have to be segregated.
But isn't that what the Department of Revenue recommends, that money is placed into an account, standalone account, so we know what's in there and it's not commingled?
My understanding is when the money is collected, it's simply turned over to the treasurer, and then the treasurer issues the checks. I'm not aware of a recommendation that identifies that a county segregate them into separate accounts or checking. That's my understanding.
My understanding, and somebody from the Department of Revenue was here, I don't know where she is, but my understanding was that y'all, Department of Revenue, they collect the penny sales tax.
Oh, yeah.
And then once they get that, they then send it to the treasurer or to the county, is that correct?
Goes to the treasurer, and then the treasurer issues checks to the counties.
And do you know of other counties that have standalone accounts just with the penny sales tax?
I do not have personal knowledge of what other counties did.
But wouldn't that make more sense to segregate that money that is earmarked like an escrow account as an attorney?
Well, I think what would make sense is for the county to be able to manage the money in the way that it believes delivers the best services to the public. If they thought that that would be achieved by putting it into a separate account, then they can do so. As you certainly know, putting monies together, which is what our treasurer does all the time, yields much higher returns than separated pots.
But that money doesn't even go to the state treasurer. We're talking back to the treasurer up here. So they don't not invest in. I mean,
The treasurer up here
I
has
wish you would
to-
just answer the question and quit talking about all these lofty ideals that you think government ought to do. And
Your question was whether or not money should be segregated into a separate account.
Correct.
And the answer was pooling money usually derives a greater return than separate pots.
But we're not gaining interest on that money. We're having this interest set aside for tax reduction.
And the greater the interest, the more tax reduction. So
Now,
I agree with your point.
Okay. Excluding 2013, you said we don't know what, the money's coming in for 2013. Excluding 2013, up through 2012 fiscal year, or has all the money that has been collected for tax relief been refunded to the taxpayers?
We are
Do you
still,
know?
well, the short answer is I do not know because the audit has yet to be done. The auditors will determine that.
All right. And there's been an audit every year.
I believe Mr. Pope said there's an audit done every year.
Standard procedures with all the counties, they get their books audited every year. Okay, and have y'all reviewed the audits of the previous years to see what recommendations the prior auditors have recommended? I mean, certainly,
I think we're certainly collecting all of the information from the past years. And just one thing that I want to say, and from, I'm certainly not a CPA, but from a governmental accounting side, and I think we need to clarify this, and that is with the general fund accounting. There are literally, even a county our size, there are millions of dollars that come into the general fund. And I can tell you at a county that I manage in Richland, I mean, it was even more so. So all of the monies come into the general fund, but there is an accounting for those funds, whether they're local option sales tax or other funds that are in a different line item in the budget. That's why we wanted to make sure that we got information from the state treasurer's office to verify the numbers of the checks that were actually cut, to make sure that we can marry those things up. So there is nothing improper by the check itself coming into the general fund itself. It's just the accounting of the local option sales tax money when it comes into the general fund.
I understand that, but it just seems to me to be earmarked those funds to me, and I'm certainly not an accountant. It would be better to place that in a standalone account so we know what's in there and what needs to be refunded to the taxpayers. So as of now, we don't know if the taxpayers are owed money up through, say, August of 2012, since this was implemented in '06.
And that's what, and I'm not trying to avoid what you're asking, but that's what we want to be final in the information that we give to the council. We want those final checks to come in where we can get to that final number. And the plan was, speaking with the council, we would work those things out, get that information to the council, and I'm assuming Of course, we would, of course, present that information back, but everything is basically in plan to be corrected way prior to the tax bills going out, because of course, on every taxpayer's bill for the residential property on the property tax, you have the local option sales tax credit. So that was the plan, to have all of that in place, corrected, have all those. Yes, sir.
But if we had a standalone account, you could go to that bank account and say, here's the money we received from the penny sales tax, without having to go to the treasurer to get that amount to make sure the checks are right.
Yes, sir.
It just makes common sense to me.
Yes, sir, that's a part of it as well, but just like we said also in the presentation is actually the calculation, what we've done for the budget, does actually play a part in that as well. So the county has to make sure that its estimates are whole, to make sure that the county has cash flow in the fiscal year.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Stevens.
Ms. Christina Fair.
Okay, I don't really have so much of a question, but I'm going to be real quick and say that we hear an awful lot about how everybody up here wants to help this county lower taxes, how they want it, and yet every year it seems to me, according to my estimations, that the millage rates have been going up on businesses. Why do you continue to tax businesses out of Fairfield County? Second homeowners and businesses pay additional property taxes than just an average homeowner. Right now, if I am correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, we pay the third highest millage rates in the state. And soon, if we stay on the track that we're going in, we will be paying the highest. With these tax rates, I can't imagine how any businesses would want to open their doors in this county. And to me, it just makes a little bit of common sense that more businesses at a lower rate would equal just as much, if not more, tax revenue than just continuing to raise taxes on the businesses that are here already. Thank you.
No one else signed tonight, Council.
Thank you. Ms. Pope?
Mr. Chairman, Council, I guess the next steps are, what we have discussed this evening is to get the first and probably one of the most important things is actually get the final numbers in from the State Treasurer's Office. Once we have that final information, also working with our auditors to look at the numbers, to come up to see exactly what credit is due or what those final numbers are. And that's the information that would be presented back to council. And I don't mean to be so forward, but I'm assuming that the council would also desire to have another meeting like this where we can actually go through a presentation, actually go through the actual numbers, where we can go through numbers so that the taxpayers can actually see that information and what the expected credit will be. And so that's actually what the next step will be once we have that information.
Michael, how long after we get that check should we be able to establish that meeting?
Perhaps 2 weeks, Mr. Chairman.
2 weeks?
And I'm only hesitant because I'm now allocating the auditor's time without having the auditor here to verify that, but I'd like to say 2 weeks.
Okay. And you think the check, Mr. Pope, would come in the middle of the month?
Yes, sir. I guess normally, like I said, the checks kind of track it's like a month behind when you receive that information, so it shouldn't be too much long before we would have the final information.
Okay. What we will do, once that final check is in, we will set up a meeting place at one of the schools. Possibly the high school would be put back together by then, and the auditorium. We have used it in previous times, so we can get you, Mr. Pope, at that time to deal with Mr. Green and the board about us using that on a given night to do just exactly what we've done tonight, to just for this particular item only. And so that the public can get the information and all the numbers will be in and we can put this thing to bed and we'll know that we're at the right place.
Mr. Chairman, just the last thing again, I know Ms. Brown does an excellent job with adding citizens who request on the distribution list. And certainly if there are other citizens who desire to be on that information list of any information that's sent out to the public, please send that information to her, or you can forward it to me where we can actually get you on any types of documentation about meetings or what have you that the council is involved in, so that you can be totally informed as to when that's going on and choose to come out and participate if you'd like.
Michael, you and Ray, I certainly do appreciate y'all coming and enlightening us on this that sales tax issue, and look forward to you to come back when we get the final numbers along with the auditor. I will now receive a motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed by the same sign, the ayes have it.